Imagine for a moment that you live in a country where owning a single US dollar can land you in prison for decades, where a pair of jeans is worth more than a worker's monthly wage, where the government promises abundance for all, but people line up at dawn just to buy bread. This isn't science fiction. This was the reality for 300 million people for over 70 years in the Soviet Union. But here's what no one tells you in history books. While Stalin built an empire based on total equality, another economy was growing in the shadows. An economy where young people risked their lives to exchange chewing gum for rubles, where families buried gold coins in their backyards as if they were pirate treasure, where the symbol of American capitalism, the dollar, became the most powerful currency in the world. It was 1918. Lenin had just seized power and promised to abolish capitalist exploitation. More than that, he promised to do away with money itself. In the Bolshevik vision, in a truly communist society, people would work for love of country and receive everything they needed from the state. Money would be merely a relic of the bourgeois past. But reality knocked on the door faster than a revolution. During the Civil War, the government militarized all production and banned private trade. The result was catastrophic. There was no food in the cities, no clothing, not even soap. People began to die of hunger in the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg. And it was precisely at this moment that the specter that would haunt the Soviet Union until its final days was born: the black market. It began small, almost invisible. A housewife would trade a loaf of bread for a pair of socks. A peasant would sell potatoes hidden behind a church. A soldier would trade ammunition for vodka. These were desperate transactions by people trying to survive. Lenin soon realized his experiment was failing. In 1921, he backed down and created the new economic policy, once again allowing small, private businesses. Thus emerged the Netmen, the first Soviet entrepreneurs, who grew wealthy by buying and selling goods that the state could not adequately distribute. But when Stalin came to power in the late 1922, he not only ended the new economic policy, he declared all-out war on any form of private trade. Possessing foreign currency or gold became a crime against the state, punishable by decades of forced labor in the gulags. Stalin believed he could control every aspect of the Soviet economy through central planning. What Stalin didn't realize was that he was creating the perfect conditions for the flourishing of the largest black market in modern history. When you ban something people need, you don't eliminate demand, you just push it into the shadows. The 1930 seconds revealed the contradictory genius of the Soviet system. Officially, Stalin had created a perfect planned economy where everyone was equal and no one went without. Unofficially, he set up some of the most sophisticated black market operations the world has ever seen. Thousands of Russian families had hidden Tsarist gold coins, jewelry, and even US dollars during the revolution. They were their insurance policies against the uncertainty of the times. Stalin knew this and devised a diabolically clever plan to capture these hidden riches. Between 1931 and 1936, the government opened special shops called Torgsen. Officially, these were foreigner shops. In practice, any Soviet citizen could enter these stores and buy quality food, imported clothing, and luxury goods. But there was one condition: you could only pay with gold, silver, or foreign currency. Imagine the scene. A Muscovite family who hadn't eaten meat in months enters a Torgsen store and sees shelves full of ham, imported cheese, and Swiss chocolate. The father of the family looks at his wife's wedding ring, a gold relic from the time of the Tsars. It's a desperate choice: preserve the memory of the past or feed his children in the present. Torgsen stores became a kind of state pawnshop. People lined up to trade their last family treasures for a sack of flour or a warm coat. Some even traveled hundreds of kilometers with gold coins hidden in their clothes, risking arrest and death to get real food. But most ironically of all, these shops created a new kind of black market. Since not everyone had gold or dollars, groups of people formed and stood guard outside the Torgsen shops. They approached foreigners, leaving the shops, and offered outrageous prices for whatever they had just bought. A Swiss chocolate bought for $2 inside the shop could sell for 20 rubles on the street, the equivalent of a worker's weekly wage. Stalin achieved his goal. Between 1931 and 1936, the Torgsen shops collected tons of gold and millions of dollars in foreign currency, financing part of Soviet industrialization. But he also achieved something he hadn't expected. He created an entire generation of Soviets who learned that bourgeois money was worth more than communist promises. World War II should have ended the Soviet black market. With millions of men at the front and the economy entirely focused on the war effort, there should have been no time or energy left for financial speculation. But the exact opposite happened. With strict rationing and widespread famine, the shadow economy became a matter of life and death. Entire families depended on the black market for basic food. Prices were astronomical. A loaf of bread on the black market cost the equivalent of a week's wages. A liter of milk was worth more than a month's rent. But it was after the war that the Soviet black market truly exploded. The USSR had become a military superpower, but its civilian economy was in shambles. The ruble was an inconvertible currency, worthless outside the communist bloc. Meanwhile, the US dollar, a symbol of the capitalist enemy, became the secret obsession of millions of Soviets. It was during this period that one of the most fascinating subcultures of the Cold War emerged, the Fartsovskiki. These were young men, usually between 18 and 25 years old, who dedicated their lives to an extremely dangerous activity. Approaching foreign tourists to exchange rubles for dollars and buying Western goods to resell on the black market. The Fartsovskiki developed sophisticated techniques. They studied basic English, memorized phrases like, "Hello friend, change money?" and learned to spot American, German, or French tourists from afar. They frequented international hotels, tourist attractions, and even airports, always with their hearts in their mouths, because the KGB had agents infiltrated everywhere. What they sought were products that had almost mystical value in the Soviet Union. Jeans, leather jackets, imported sneakers, Beatles records, Zippo lighters, Marlboro cigarettes, Scotch whiskey. Each of these items was worth a fortune on the black market. A pair of Levi's jeans could sell for 200 rubles, more than an engineer's monthly salary. But it wasn't just a matter of money. It was a matter of status and rebellion. Wearing American jeans or lighting a Marlboro cigarette in public was a silent form of protest against communist uniformity. It was a taste of individual freedom in a society that preached only the collective. The 1,970 seconds marked the height of the Soviet black market. The official economy was stagnant, but the shadow economy flourished like never before. Estimates indicate that the second economy represented between 20% and 30% of all economic activity in the USSR, an astronomical figure for an officially communist country. The black market exposed the sham of the Soviet monetary system. Officially, the ruble was worth more than the dollar. In practice, a dollar was worth between 6 and 10 rubles on the shadow market. This distortion created incredible opportunities for those brave enough to take risks. It was during this period that one of the most dramatic episodes in the history of the Soviet black market occurred. In 1961, police arrested a young man named Yen Rokotov with $1.5 million in cash and gold hidden in his Moscow apartment. It was a fortune that rivaled the reserves of many small countries. Rokotov had built a veritable black market empire. He had a network of suppliers that included diplomats, Aeroflot pilots, and even Communist Party officials. He bought dollars from tourists and resold them to wealthy Soviets who needed hard currency to buy imported goods or travel abroad illegally. The Rokotov case exposed something the government had been trying to hide. People were becoming immensely wealthy through illegal activities, while the majority of the population lived in poverty. Even more serious, some of these people had connections within the state apparatus itself. Khrushchev decided to make an example of Rokotov. Days before the trial, he changed the law to include the death penalty for economic crimes, a measure that was applied retroactively. Rokotov and his main associates were shot in a public square. The message was clear. Handling dollars could be as treasonous as betraying the country. But not even shootings could stem the thirst for dollars. If anything changed, it was that the market became even more sophisticated and clandestine. Codes, slang, and complex rituals emerged. Experienced money changers developed techniques to detect undercover KGB agents. They created mutual protection networks and communication systems that rivaled espionage operations. The irony was stark. In the midst of the Cold War, while the two superpowers pointed nuclear missiles at each other, millions of Soviets risked their lives to possess pieces of paper bearing the faces of American presidents. Today, more than 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the black market for currencies seems like ancient history, but its lessons are more relevant than ever. In a world where governments try to control cryptocurrencies, restrict international transfers, and monitor every digital transaction, the story of the Fartsovshiki reminds us of a fundamental truth. It is impossible to completely control the human desire to exchange, trade, and seek alternatives. The Soviet black market was not just a historical curiosity. It was a gigantic laboratory that tested the limits of state control over the economy. And the results were clear. Even the most totalitarian regimes could not suppress the basic forces of the market. More importantly, the black market served as a safety valve that allowed the Soviet system to function longer than it should have. Without the parallel economy supplying products that the state could not distribute, the USSR would have collapsed decades earlier. Ironically, what the government considered its greatest internal threat was also what allowed its survival. But this survival came at a price. By tacitly tolerating the black market, the Soviet state admitted its own incompetence. Every dollar illegally exchanged was a vote of no confidence in the official ruble. Every smuggled Western product was proof that the communist system could not meet the basic needs of its people. The black market also created an entire generation of Soviets who learned to distrust official discourse and seek alternatives on their own. It was these people accustomed to navigating the line between law and reality who became the entrepreneurs of modern Russia. The history of the Fartsovshiki teaches us that markets always find a way to exist, even in the most adverse conditions. That ordinary people can become incredibly creative when faced with scarcity and repression. And that no political system, no matter how powerful, can indefinitely ignore the basic laws of supply and demand. Today, when we see governments trying to control digital currencies or restrict free trade, it's worth remembering the Soviet lesson. You can ban the market, but you can't ban human nature from seeking alternatives.